Bluetooth audio is lossy and nothing like wired connection. Bluetooth is not high resolution and it has a long way to go before it rivals actual high resolution lossless formats. However, Bluetooth is convenient. I use Bluetooth headphones every day, hours at a time, and do see merit in it. For basic audio transmission, you really do not need to spend hundreds of dollars on Bluetooth headphones. All you need is a basic headphone that does not make you spit out your vodka martini when you see the price tag. Today, we're going to discuss the Status Audio BT1. This is a headphone that sells for between $60 and $100. I recently purchased the BT1 for review. If you read the title of this video, you probably know where this is going. The BT1, as you will hear throughout this video, is a basic headphone that provides basically good performance. Let's quickly talk about Status Audio first. This company was started and is run in the United States, but their manufacturing is in China. Status Audio has a few products. Their philosophy is clearly stated. They say, quote, "We believe in simplicity. Headphones should enable a great listening experience no matter who is listening or what is being listened to, without complications or gimmicks." End quote. Status Audio says they love music and pay a staff comprised of engineers, designers, musicians, and audiophiles. The BT1 is not going to win awards for build. There's heavy-handed use of plastic on this headphone. The headband is plastic, the yoke is plastic, the ear cup housing is plastic, the buttons are plastic. The back of the ear cups might have a slim cut of metal, but it's hard to tell. The headphones creak when you adjust them. The ear pads and headband padding are plush. These are not real leather, but they're very soft. The ear pad material seems to be memory foam. I'm not so sure about the padding on the headband. Despite the pleather, the ear pads and headband do feel supple. There are 3 buttons and one 3.5mm input on the right ear cup. The buttons control playback. Near the front of the right ear cup is also a toggle switch. This turns the headphone on for Bluetooth use. On the left ear cup is a USB-C port for charging. You cannot use this headphone through USB connection. The BT1 does not have noise cancellation. Status Audio does not provide any companion application. The headphones fold into a compact size and can be stored in their very sturdy protective case, or in the alternative, you can toss them in a bag, although might be a little careful because of the plastic build. The packaging includes a USB-C charging cable and a 3.5mm cable without inline controls, which I very much appreciate. I hate inline controls on my cables, and its omission here is a pleasant surprise. Sometimes less is more. Both cables seem to be well made. The 3.5mm cable, for example, has metal covers. The straight end is for the headphone, while there's a slight angle for the source end. This cable is fairly pliable and does have a little bit of microphonics. In other words, when rubbed against clothing or a surface, you will hear some of that noise through the cable. As for comfort, there's a bit of a give and take. I have to adjust the headband to almost its full length for a proper fit. There is a bit of pressure on the top of my head, but nothing alarming and perfectly within norms of most headphones. The ear pads sit right on top of my ears. There's just enough clamping force to get a good seal, but not enough to cause discomfort. I have worn this headphone for 2 to 3 hours non-stop and have never felt the need to take them off because clamping force or pressure was too great. However, the ear pads will cause ears to get warm, and that may require brief periods of rest. Overall, the build is nothing special. The generous use of plastic has 2 functions. First, it keeps the headphone fairly cheap. Second, it keeps the headphone very light. If you're rough with your gear, then this headphone might not be for you. As for comfort, let me put it this way. This headphone is now my gold standard for on-ear comfort. I have never worn any on-ear headphone that is as comfortable as the BT1. I am not a fan of on-ear designs because my ears tend to get pinched, but a few headphones have been acceptable over the years. I include in this list the Audio-Technica ATH M60S, Sennheiser HD25, and Philips M1 Mark II. The BT1 easily is the most comfortable of this lot. We will discuss Bluetooth sound and connection later. Here, we want to give this headphone an opportunity to perform at its best without the issue of lossy Bluetooth connection. I used a stock cable and plugged the headphone into my low-2-paw S1. This is a neutral dank amp. I kept the S1 on high gain and did not use any of the EQ filters. I also used my Shit Modi and Monolith Liquid Spark stack. Again, this is a neutral setup. I cross-checked between these sources to make sure my findings were consistent. I played music through Amazon Music HD. You do not need to turn the BT1 on for wired connection. Consequently, I kept power off on this headphone. The BT1 is really easy to drive. On a high gain, the S1 provided comfortable volume at 1 out of 100 volume steps. At step 48, the volume was at maximum safe levels. On low gain, I achieved comfortable volume at step 25. The BT1 became uncomfortably loud at step 75. On the Liquid Spark, the BT1 was at very comfortable volume at about 9 o'clock on the volume knob. With high gain engaged, I got similar volume around 7 o'clock. Status Audio says that the BT1 is tuned for, quote, depth, punch, and accuracy. They claim that they have brought the warmth and authenticity of analog connection into the wireless universe. It appears that the BT1 does not have neutral bass. Rather, there is a noticeable mid-bass boost. Sub-bass seems to be just slightly rolled off. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, the BT1 recreated the sub-bass rumble that starts from the beginning of the song. However, that rumble was a little recessed and hard to hear. I had to increase volume significantly to finally hear the reverberation. The crescendo in the song hits at the middle, and the BT1 rendered the organ, though not with much clarity. The organ is supposed to cut through the mix, but the BT1 instead melded it with all the other instruments. When the vocals chimed in at the end of the song, they were shoulder to shoulder with the instruments. In Conquer by Overwork, the BT1 presented the rolling marble effect at the beginning of the song. This sound is supposed to pan from right to left to center, but the BT1 kept it dead center. There are multiple drums in this track, and the BT1 rendered all of them. These drums had hard impact, though some of their energy was a little relaxed. In other words, it appeared as though I was sitting 15 to 20 feet away from the drums, close enough to hear and feel the impact, but far enough away so that I could not hear the sharp thwacking of drumsticks on drum heads. Mid-bass transients was about average, and each subsequent drum hit melded a little with the previous. I listened to several hip-hop songs including Uproar, New Patek, Reel It In, and Pure Water. In all these tracks, it appeared that the subwoofer was in the same room as me but at the other end. Frankly, it sounded as if the subwoofer needed just a tiny bit more power. Mid-bass impact was hard but slightly blunted. Imagine the difference between a sharp thwack and a thud. The BT1 presented the thud. Vocals appeared to be about one step ahead of the instruments and had their requisite sparkle. Overall, it appears that the BT1 has what some might call thick bass. I would not characterize this as bloated or distorted, far from it. Instead, the mid-bass is elevated while the sub-bass is slightly rolled off. There is some melding between sub-bass and mid-bass. Bass-heavy songs present more of the mid-bass instruments than any other elements. The BT1 does not provide any noteworthy amount of detail or resolution in the bass frequency. If you like your bass a little boosted with about average transients, then the BT1 should make you quite happy. But if you're looking for fast transients and clarity, then this is not the headphone for you. The mids appear to be close to neutral, full, and never harsh. In Orla Gartland's song, Why Am I Like This?, there is natural grain and sibilance mixed into the track. The BT1 presented both details without accentuating either. Orla's sibilance can be harsh on some headphones that boost the sibilance range, but that is not the effect on the BT1. The drums and guitar both sounded full, although the drums were louder and the guitar tended to take a step back in presentation. Separation of instruments was average. In other words, instrument notes did tend to meld, creating a robust sound. When the backup vocalist chimed in at the end of the song, she did appear ahead of the instruments, but still further back from the primary vocalist. In Want You Back by Haim, the BT1 again demonstrated that it does not accentuate sibilance. In this track, the primary singer has obvious sibilance that sounds fairly neutral on the BT1. At 8 seconds into the song, the singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The BT1 presented this detail, but it was smoothed out and not quite as obvious as it could have been. The two backup vocalists in this track tended to meld into one voice, but upon close inspection, I could just pick out their individual tonalities. The guitar, piano, drums, and bass all sounded natural and had true timbre. However, all the instruments also tended to meld, resulting in a lack of precise detail. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the BT1 accurately recreated the ukulele, but the drums appear to be slightly boosted, whereas the bass was a little recessed. The primary male vocalist sounded smooth, and his sibilance was neutral. There is a backup vocalist in this track, but the BT1 did not reveal him, and this is a problem that most headphones I have tested seem to exhibit. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds in this song, there are supposed to be sharp intakes of breath. The BT1 did recreate the breathing, but not the sharpness associated with them. Indeed, the breathing sounded just a little bit more smooth than I have heard on actual neutral headphones. I listened to several songs by the folk singer Guy Clark. Guy used multiple acoustic guitars in his music. He also had a gruff, gravelly Marlboro Man type of voice. All the acoustic guitars in Guy's songs were full and natural. I could hear the gentle picking from the hard strumming. Guy's voice was forward, intimate, and retained most of its gruff sound signature. However, it also appeared that his vocals were a bit smooth, more so than what I have heard on neutral headphones. On some tracks, the guitarists thump their palms on the body of their guitars. The BT1 created a true thumping sensation whenever this happened, almost as if I was mere steps away from the guitar. Overall, the mid's presentation is not quite neutral, but a fair approximation of it. The headphone does tend to add a slight bit of smoothing to vocals, and voices are intimate, close to your ears. Complex songs with multiple instruments will tend to sound thick. That is, notes will meld and mix, resulting in a loss of some clarity and detail. However, simpler compositions, where only one or two instruments with vocals are present, do present average amount of detail and clarity. The treble on the BT1 seems to be just slightly elevated, but never harsh or peaky. Furthermore, the BT1 does add a slight bit of smoothing to some instruments. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the brass and horns cut through the mix. They were marginally more energetic than on true neutral headphones, but the boost was not significant. One thing I did immediately notice was the smoothing of these instruments. The brass and horns are supposed to have a nasally effect, but the BT1 smoothed that detail. I could still hear it, but it was not pronounced and not quite accurate. The timpani was audible but not bloated. I could hear group sets but not individual instruments. All instruments tended to meld, creating a thick sound signature. The BT1 exhibits some depth but no verticality. In other words, some instruments sounded further away than others, but there is no sense of up or down. In Flight from the City by Johan Johansson, the BT1 rendered the piano about 5 feet away. Its bassier notes were indeed boosted, but not distorted. Each note melded with the next. There is some electric buzzing and pops and sizzles in this track. The BT1 rendered some of this detail, but tended to smooth out both details, making them less obvious. The cello was smooth and melded slightly with the piano. I could hear the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench and the shifting of the cello, but both details were somewhat muffled. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the BT1 rendered the piano in the right, the drum kit in the left, the saxophone dead center, and the bass layered in between. The drums were the loudest instrument in the mix, followed by the saxophone, then the piano. The bass was audible but melded noticeably with the other instruments. The saxophone was smooth, though it also appeared to have just a tiny bit more energy than on neutral headphones. Overall, the BT1 presents a slightly elevated treble that is not harsh or peaky. It also tends to smooth out some treble instruments, including brass and horns. This results in an interesting dichotomy. On the one hand, some treble instruments are more pronounced in a mix, but at the same time, fairly gentle on the ears. Throughout this video, I have tried to highlight the details I can hear. In this section, I will merely summarize. If you expect the BT1 to provide details, you are operating with a misunderstanding. The BT1 is not marketed as a detailed headphone, and it certainly does not perform like a detail-oriented headphone. Instead, the BT1 provides an average at best detail and probably a little less. Some obvious details are easily audible, while others are a little muffled. Micro details will not be easy to distinguish. I think the key factor will be the complexity of your tracks and whether bass is prominent in them. I noticed that tracks with an emphasis towards the bass instruments and multiple vocalists sounded less detailed than tracks with fewer elements. For example, Superposition and Want You Back contain lots of different elements and they all tend to meld together, resulting in a loss of some detail. However, switch to simpler compositions such as tracks by Guy Clark and guitar plucking, multiple vocals, and some micro details become clearly audible. Of course, a lot of this depends on your original recording and the source you are using. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children, wind, rustling of grass, synth, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. On the Full Cal Clear, I hear 18 footsteps. The Austrian Audio Hi X55 presents 15 footsteps. The LCD-1, HD6XS, and HD660S each presents 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann NDH-20 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. The BT-1 presented 4 footsteps. This was consistent with my test. The BT-1 tends to meld notes and instruments, which results in some details being lost. New Light is a complicated track with many elements. The BT-1 simply could not separate the varying instruments and the details. Soundstage is somewhat subjective. Unless you have something to judge against, you have no idea what to expect. Every Beats headphone I've ever heard has narrow, nearly claustrophobic soundstage. This is a good, or bad, depending on your viewpoint, starting point. The Neumann NDH-20 has below average to average at best soundstage. The audeze LCD-1, Sennheiser HD6XX, and HD660S each has about average soundstage. The hifi Man Sundara and Aventone Planar have above average to just under wide soundstage. The hifi Man Diva has wide soundstage. The Sennheiser HD800S has super wide soundstage. The BT-1 is similar to the NDH-20 in terms of soundstage. Most of the time it sounds below average, and on some tracks it is about average. Keep in mind that the original recording method is a critical factor. The BT-1 has SBC and aptX. It supports multi-point connection with at least 2 devices. The BT-1 will prioritize connection to the source, which sends audio signal first. There is a very short delay between turning the BT-1 on and pairing it with a previously paired device. In fact, it's about 2 to 3 seconds. I don't care where you come from or what headphone company you favor, the BT-1's startup time is damn impressive. Status Audio says that the BT-1 has a 30-hour battery life. I think they are very close to the mark. In my experience, the BT-1 seems to get around 25 hours. One of the things we look for in Bluetooth headphone performance is whether Bluetooth sound signature is different from wired sound. Bluetooth headphones have internal DACs and amplifiers. When you use a wired connection, the DAC and amp in headphones are bypassed. The question for the BT-1 is whether it sounds different in Bluetooth mode versus wired mode. I already thoroughly explained the sound signature of the BT-1 in wired connection. Here, we will briefly talk about the differences I was able to hear. The Bluetooth connection is somewhat noisy. When you first turn Bluetooth on, there's no issue, but once paired, the BT-1 does exhibit a slight buzzing in the right ear cup. Sometimes it was audible and sometimes it was not. It was never consistent, and it happened most often with my iPhone 12. However, when music played and I listened at casual volume, that noise was pushed into the background and became inaudible. I should emphasize that the slight buzzing on the BT-1 is nowhere near as annoying or obvious as what I heard on the Drop Panda when I reviewed that headphone. As for sound signature, there is a change in the BT-1's Bluetooth sound signature compared to the wired connection. For example, there appears to be a slight sub-bass accentuation over Bluetooth, whereas through wired connection there was a marginal sub-bass roll-off over Bluetooth. The sub-bass appears to have more presence and reverberation. It is clearly a little bit louder. Mid-bass impact appears to be slightly harder as well, with a slightly greater emphasis on mid-bass energy. Recall, during the wired testing, the mid-bass appeared to have a slight thudding, almost as if some energy was missing. Over wireless, that energy is in fact present. The mids over the Bluetooth signal have a different presentation as well. Vocals sound a little bit clearer. Female sibilance is slightly elevated, though not harsh. Vocalists appear to be further separated from instruments than what I heard through wired connection. The difference was not significant but noticeable. The timbre and decay of instruments appeared to be about the same over both connection methods. Treble seems to be a bit more energetic over Bluetooth connection. Horns and brass cut through other instruments like hot knife through butter. They are not harsh or peaky, however. Unlike on wired connection, the brass and horns do retain their nasally sound signatures. There is also more clarity, more separation of instruments over Bluetooth connection. Detail retrieval is noticeably greater over Bluetooth than over wired connection. Recall, over wired connection, I mentioned that there was melding of instruments and a loss of some detail. I said that on my test song, New Light, the BT1 presented 4 footsteps. Over Bluetooth, the BT1 had greater clarity and separation of instruments. On New Light, the BT1 presented 5 to 6 footsteps, and all of those details were more easily audible, more crisp, more obvious than what I heard through wired connection. I do not think that Soundstage is affected much. You might get the impression of more Soundstage, but that will be because the Bluetooth connection provides a bit more clarity. My overall impression is that Status Audio is using some type of DSP for Bluetooth connection here. I seriously doubt that this DSP is neutral tuning, but it does provide a noticeable difference in signature from the wired connection. Status Audio says that the BT1 provides an analog sound signature. That's pretty vague, but I would tend to agree with their assessment. To me, the word analog means a sound signature which presents natural vocals, slightly boosted bass, and a fairly smooth presentation. I do not expect details. I think the BT1 has 2 related but different sound signatures. It depends on whether you use these headphones wired or wireless. Let's break down both. Here are my findings for a wired connection using neutral sources. I would characterize the AudioQuest Night Owl and Nighthawk as headphones that have an analog signature. I would say that the Chord Mojo and AudioQuest Dragonfly Red are amp-DACs with an analog sound profile. The BT1 seems to fit this definition as well. Here, you get a slight sub-bass roll-off but a mid-bass boost. This mid-bass emphasis is not boomy or bloated. However, drums do tend to sound louder than other instruments, and the decay is about average. This results in a bass response that has more body, more presence, at the cost of detail and separation. The mids are also intimate. Vocals always sound close to your ears. The mids are just shy of neutral. Sibilance seems to be properly, accurately recreated. However, the BT1 also tends to add a bit of smoothing to some elements. Grain and harshness that might be present in some tracks gets smoothed out. Instruments always have correct timbre, but they also meld heavily with each other. Treble is slightly elevated but not harsh. Again, the BT1 adds a slight bit of smoothing to brass and horns. So while those instruments are loud, they are not peaky or grainy. Soundstage is average at best. There is no verticality, but you might hear some depth. In other words, some elements may appear closer and others further away, depending on your recording. Details are sacrificed, however. The BT1's detail performance is among the worst of any headphone I have tested. Even for headphones in this price range, the BT1 fails at delivering precise, clear details, no matter what the recording happens to be. Complex tracks suffer the most. More simple tracks, such as those by Guy Clark, fare better. However, I can easily think of a dozen headphones within the $100 price tag that outperform the BT1 in detail retrieval. Now, this may sound negative, and to some it is. If you want detail, resolution, accuracy, then the BT1 is not for you. The BT1 does fit a different requirement, however. This is an analog-sounding headphone, one which presents thick bass, intimate yet smooth vocals with a touch of treble excitement. All that I just said was in regards to wired connection. Now, let's turn to Bluetooth sound signature. When I say Bluetooth sound signature, I'm not referring to the Bluetooth codec. Instead, I refer to the BT1's DSP. Wireless connection results in more clarity, more detail, more sub-bass, more sibilance, and more treble. The differences are not night and day, but you will likely hear a difference nonetheless. The analog sound signature I spoke of through wired connection sounds less analog, at least in my opinion. The way I would describe the differences is this. Over wired connection, you get a relaxed presentation where you are unlikely to hear a harsh sound. Over wireless connection, you get a more lively sound signature. If you watch my reviews regularly, you know my style. You know how this process works. However, I'm going to surprise you today. I'm going to tell you my personal preference regarding this headphone. I typically refuse to promote my own sound signature preferences, but this time I will. However, you will have to wait until the end. First, we need to talk about the overall performance and money involved. The BT1 is in a weird position. Prices for Bluetooth headphones are all over the place. You can get decent Bluetooth headphones for as cheap as $20, or you can spend up to $600 for the name brand stuff, such as some from Beyerdynamic. The higher the price ladder you go, the more you reasonably expect. Noise cancellation, comfort, build, and application support are all things that we start demanding the higher the MSRP is. Unfortunately, we don't always get that. Take a look at the AKG K361BT and K371BT. Both headphones cost well over $100. They're built well enough, but they come with bottom-barrel Bluetooth codecs, and they don't have application support. Jump up several factors to the Beyerdynamic Amaron wireless, and you get aptX support and an application. But you can't use LDAC since this headphone doesn't support it, and the application is fairly limited. Clearly, price is a terrible indicator of performance and features. This puts the BT1 in context. The BT1 has a chiefly plastic build. It creaks. It will break if handled roughly. This headphone has no application support. It does not have noise cancellation. There is no bass boost functionality or any other EQ built in. You get SBC and aptX support. No LDAC, no aptX low latency, no aptX HD. Hell, although the earpads can be removed, you can't find any third-party alternatives. This means that if Status Audio sells replacement earpads, you have to contact customer support directly since Status Audio does not sell replacements directly on their website. The sound signature of the BT1 is always a personal matter. As with most Bluetooth headphones, the BT1 has a different sound signature depending on whether you use a cable or connect wirelessly. The differences in sound signature are not night and day, but noticeable. Wired connection brings you a more relaxed, less detailed presentation. Wireless connection brings you more clarity, more detail, and more separation of instruments along with a push in sibilance and treble. In other words, with wired connection through a neutral source, the BT1 has kind of a lazy V-shape. The bass is slightly boosted, the mids are marginally recessed, and the treble is marginally pushed forward. Over Bluetooth connection, the BT1 has a more traditional V-shaped signature. Bass has a greater push than before. On wired connection, vocals stand out a little bit more, and treble has greater emphasis. Whether either type of sound signature is to your liking will be up to you to decide. This brings us to value. Yeah, I think that the BT1 is value, but $100 is probably pushing it. Luckily, the BT1 is regularly on sale at different retailers. You can usually find it between $70 and $100. The BT1 is very nicely packaged. You get an excellent protective case, good cables, and a compact headphone. Although made of plastic, the BT1 seems well built to handle normal usage. For around $100, you cannot yet expect LDAC. I assume Sony's licensing fees make it impossible for this headphone. Regardless, aptX is good enough considering most headphones within this price range and higher do not have LDAC. The BT1 might not impress you with its overall build, and the sound signature may not be to your liking, but you have to concede that Status Audio did put some thought and care into the production. Now, for my subjective impression, this is something I rarely talk about, but I feel compelled to say something regarding the BT1. I thoroughly enjoy the BT1. Wired or wireless, the performance is perfectly agreeable. I'm a big fan of the warm, relaxed sound signature. I don't want it all the time, but I do favor it. I walk 5 miles every evening. I had been using my Apple AirPods Pro for a few years and rather dislike those overpriced pieces of junk. I have plenty of headphones and IEMs to choose from, and although I have tried to find a substitute, I have continued to use the earpads out of, well, convenience if nothing else. But the BT1 is the first product that has been able to replace my reliance on the AirPods. The BT1 is compact, light, and comfortable. It's not flashy or complicated. My AirPods regularly have connection problems with my iPhone, drop signal, or one earbud just not connecting, not to mention the constant issue of the AirPods depleting battery faster and faster every charge cycle. Apple made a big deal about the AirPods having instant connection to your Apple devices. Well, the BT1 is as fast. I flip the switch to on, and by the time I put the headphones on my head, they're already connected. On the AirPods, however, I always have to check to make sure both earbuds are actually synced, a problem that I run into often enough to cause frustration. So, for me, the BT1 is an excellent headphone. I would never use the BT1 for critical listening. And yes, there are similar sounding headphones for much cheaper, the Cost Porter Pro and KPH30i being the immediate alternatives. But the BT1 is the only Bluetooth headphone I've heard so far which provides that type of sound signature. And for the price, it fits for me. Now that my very subjective, totally irrelevant preference is done, let me emphasize that the BT1 is not for everybody. There are enough issues here for people to disregard this headphone. The plastic build, limited Bluetooth codec support, lack of noise cancellation, no application, and overall price may be deal breakers, and this is well before you even consider the sound signature. But I think that the BT1 is still value to those who want the warm, analog sound signature the BT1 offers. This headphone is compact, well accessorized, and comfortable. And I think it is worth your consideration.